Ancient Rome is a world that most of us only get to know through movies, TV shows, and books. It's easy to think of it as this far-off ancient past with little bearing on our modern world. But did you know that the business of entertainment in ancient Rome was surprisingly similar to how it is today? Sure, we don't have chariot racing or beast hunts, but they did have the one thing that truly captures the imagination like nothing else: gladiators. Gladiators were the superstars of their day, famous faces who had screaming fans and would sell out shows everywhere they went. And as long as the crowds kept roaring for blood, this remarkable subculture would continue to thrive. So what exactly made the perfect gladiator? Well, let's find out. This is the last recruitment poster you'd ever want to see. Seriously, if you see one of these, run and hide because the net is closing in and you won't survive. The men who became gladiators were mostly slaves. They could be captured during war, be the sons of slaves, or even free men who just got really unlucky. Once a potential gladiator was identified, he would be taken away from everything he knew and loved and shipped off to a place called a ludus. This was basically a training camp where the slave was trained for the one purpose of being a fighter. In the movie Gladiator, Russell Crowe's character is trained by a grizzled old veteran. And while this probably happened sometimes, it wasn't the norm. Most gladiators were taught by other gladiators, which was great for them because it meant they didn't have to listen to their horrible masters while learning how to fight. That said, this didn't mean they were treated well. In fact, it was quite the opposite. If a gladiator didn't learn quickly, he might get beaten up by his fellow trainees, or worse, get selected for an early fight and thrown into the arena to die. To put it simply, there was no room for slackers here. Learning how to fight in the Roman style took dedication, discipline, and an insane amount of endurance. New recruits were taught how to use their weapons, how to defend themselves, and yes, how to kill other people. It was also important to learn how to be as vicious and intimidating as possible. After all, the whole point of the Colosseum was for spectators to get lost in the experience, and few things are more immersive than a hulking warrior spewing curses and threatening the crowd while waving a bloody sword. As a result, it was often the mentally unstable criminals and those who delighted in violence who became the best gladiators. Speaking of swords, gladiators used all sorts of different weapons and armor depending on the kind of fighter they were. This means that if you wanted to recreate a battle between Rome and Carthage, for example, you'd be able to do so inside the arena. Some gladiators fought with nets and tridents. Others had swords and shields. Some even rode chariots into battle. This isn't too surprising when you consider that Rome was a huge empire that conquered much of the known world. As a result, it had armies from many different cultures at its disposal. But why wouldn't they just pick one type of soldier and copy them? Well, the answer has to do with realism. See, the reason gladiatorial combat was so popular was because it recreated real battles. And what's more exciting than watching two warriors you've never seen before go head-to-head and try to kill each other? But if you only recruited from one type of soldier, your audience would eventually get bored. So variety was key, and it gave the crowds plenty to cheer about. Being a gladiator wasn't all hard work either. When the games were over, it was time to party, and boy, did they party hard. Like any kind of celebrity, gladiators were expected to live their lives to the fullest when they weren't busy killing people. Many of them had luxurious villas, beautiful wives, and fistfuls of gold. In fact, some sources say that gladiators could make as much money as high-ranking senators, and that's saying something because those guys were paid a lot. It wasn't all sunshine and roses, though, because while gladiators were celebrities, they were still very much second-class citizens. Being half-naked in front of thousands of cheering Romans was exactly glorious, and many gladiators were looked down upon. However, this all changed after the fall of the empire. As the Middle Ages rolled around, gladiators began to be viewed as symbols of bravery and honor. There was even a period of time when being a gladiator was hereditary, meaning your son could become a gladiator if you wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. Of course, this only lasted a few hundred years, after which being a gladiator once again became synonymous with being a slave or prisoner. It should also be noted that not all gladiators were created equal. Some came from the lowest rungs of society and were expected to die quickly, while others were well-trained and almost certainly walk away with their lives. These guys were called myrmidons, and they were some of the most popular gladiators of their day. They were tough, highly skilled fighters who usually wore helmets with netting so they could use their swords and shields. While keeping their heads protected, their fights could last a long time because of this, and they were known for being extremely violent. As you can imagine, the crowd loved them. While other gladiators were considered low-life, one man stood above them all, the bestiarius. This guy was responsible for hunting wild animals, and it was one of the most dangerous jobs in the Colosseum. No armor was allowed, and the beasts didn't hold back. However, this didn't stop the bestiarius. He was given a trident and a dagger, and that was it. Oh yeah, and the crowd would throw rotten food at the beasts to distract them and make the fight last longer. Talk about an unfair advantage. She thought that was crazy? You ain't heard nothing yet? Some gladiators fought while mounted on chariots. Yep, chariots. You know those horse-drawn carts that Egyptians invented 4,000 years ago? Well, they stuck around until the fall of the Roman Empire, and they found new life in the Colosseum. Chariot fighting wasn't anything like normal chariot racing, that's for sure. You'd whip the other charioteers to stay ahead of them. Needless to say, it was pretty dangerous. A mistimed flick of the wrist could send a spear flying directly into the neck of the person next to you. But hey, it's all part of the fun, right? Even though it seems like gladiators were instantly killed when they entered the arena, that wasn't always the case. In fact, some of them became celebrities because of their fighting prowess. So over time, people would pay admission for the games just to see them fight. And since most gladiators were slaves, this could earn them their freedom. The crowd had a big heart, especially if you were good at killing people. It was common for freed gladiators to be given a small pension, a house, and sometimes even the hand of a noblewoman. This was a great way to start a new life, assuming you didn't mind the scars. As we mentioned earlier, gladiators were generally invincible as long as the crowd enjoyed watching them fight. But what happened when the mighty warrior got too old to fight? Well, unfortunately, there aren't many records to tell us what happened to the old gladiators, but we can make a pretty good guess. Some likely spent their remaining days giving training to new recruits, while others probably lived out their lives as entertainers. Either way, being a gladiator was a tough job. And when you're injured and nobody wants to watch you anymore, your life could quickly go downhill. So what was the most brutal thing about being a gladiator? Was it the fighting, the taunting, or having to sit through endless amounts of paperwork? Well, actually, the most brutal thing about being a gladiator was getting injured and then having to recover. You see, back in the day, medicine was more art than science. It was common for doctors to perform surgery without cleaning their hands first. This led to all kinds of complications, including the death of Marcus Aurelius. So you can imagine what would happen to a gladiator who was injured in the arena. Antibiotics weren't invented until 1928, so getting a cut or bruise was basically a death sentence. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and come back soon for another amazing video.